And Dr. Robert Masson is moderating today's discussion. He is a professor emeritus in theology and a member of the Marquette Campus Common Ground Group. So I'm going to pass things off now to Robert to introduce our panelists for the day.
Thank you, Amanda. So there are two techniques that are pretty central to community organizing. One is one-on-one relations, and you'll hear about them a little bit later on. But the other is when we are doing research campaigns and set our citizens out for meetings with people in business or government or NGOs. At these research meetings, we have kind of a standard format we use. We usually tell what the agenda is and then ask everyone in the room to introduce themselves. We begin by introducing ourselves and then go around. So we'll use that procedure here. And the agenda is pretty simple. I'm going to ask Bob Conley and Sue Jaimo and Steve Calme and Matt Laviola to give us a little background about how they got involved in Common Ground, and then particularly about TV and what. Actually, Amanda's already given you the key information. Bob Masson, emeritus professor, taught in the theology department for 39 years. Bob, could you, and I guess to facilitate this, I'll ask people to introduce themselves. So Bob, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, and I'd like to know who the other folks are in the room too, Bob. If you.
Yeah, so we're going to go around.
All right, good. So my name is Bob Conley. I'm an alumnus of Marquette. I graduated in 1971, prehistoric times, and I have been involved in community organizing for most of my career. I've also owned a company called the James Company, which helps churches and religious groups raise money. I'm now retired. I also used to teach a class at Marquette in the social welfare and justice major for community organizing. It was an introductory class to community organizing. That's it for now.
Sue?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Sue Jaimo, and I teach in the political science and biomedical science departments here at Marquette. And I have been involved with Common Ground since it started. So that's, I don't know, maybe a dozen years, mainly through my church, St. Catherine's on 51st and Center. And then when I talked to Bob earlier this year, he asked about getting a Get Out the Vote Marquette. And so I agreed to do that with Bob Masson and some students who were looking for a way to get involved in a voter registration effort.
Matt.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Laviola. I'm a senior in the College of Health Sciences. So I got involved in Common Ground back in April. I was in Dr. Jaimo's class, Biology of Moral Behavior. And I was just drawn, I felt the need to do something with all the division in our country at the time. And as someone who really believes in the elective democracy and the democratic process, I figured the best way to push positive change was to encourage people to, go out to the polls and vote. And, that's how I got drawn into the voting campaign through Common Ground.
Okay. Clara?
Hi. Where's it?
Oh,
just
sorry.
Giant bite of sandwich in my mouth. I apologize. Yeah, I'm Clara Dwyer, and I work in our Center for Engagement and Inclusion here on our campus.
Good. Parisa, am I saying that right?
Yes, Parisa. Hi, everyone. I work with the Center for Peacemaking on Marquette's campus, and I'm excited to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Mary Sue?
All right, I'm going to see if I can do this without the dog barking in the back. Sorry. I'm Mary Sue Callan Farley, Director of Campus Ministry. Campus Ministry is one of the sponsors of Soup with Substance. So welcome everyone, and Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here.
And Jessica?
Hi, I'm Jessica Rich. I teach in the political science department, and I have been sort of peripherally involved with the Common Ground's GOTV campaign. About it during one of my meetings. You and Amber Wachowski. So mainly, I've been trying to get my own students to join Common Ground and be involved, but then I just became more broadly interested in Common Ground's vision and mission. So happy to be here.
Great. Yoon?
Yeah, as Amanda sort of introduced me, I teach in the philosophy department. And I also sort of just peripherally got involved with Common Ground recently. I heard about it from one of those many, many gigantic university-wide meetings we were having, and still going on now. And so, yeah, I've mainly been trying to get my own students a little bit aware and active. I'm not sure how much I succeeded, but it was very useful and encouraging to be sort of seeing what Common Ground is doing there. So, yeah.
Great. And I think Michael Sheets.
Hi, this is Mike Sheets. I'm a Marquette alumni, and I just want to learn more. So everyone call in.
Welcome. Is there anybody I missed? I think I got everybody.
I don't think I went.
My
Steve. Memory's not great either.
I'm sorry, Steve. No.
I'm Steve Callan. I'm a doctoral student in theology. My dissertation is kind of looking at racial justice issues. And I got involved in Common Ground basically just a little bit before the election. So just with this most recent campaign, after the April elections here, I was just surprised and disappointed in a lot of the balloting problems that I had heard about personally from a lot of friends who didn't get ballots or whose ballots were rejected for one reason or another. So I think that was kind of my push to get involved in the process. And Bob was the one who recruited me.
Invited you.
Bob Masson invited me, yes.
Well, thank you, everyone. So Bob Conley, he's responsible for Common Ground existing here in Milwaukee. Bob, could you give us a little background about Common Ground, tell a little bit about some of our campaigns, and then how and why we got into the Get Out the Vote this year?
Okay, Bob, thanks. I'm sorry I didn't get on earlier to figure this technology out so you could see my beautiful face, but so be it. You're better off without it anyway. Let's talk about Common Ground. We're an alliance of churches, schools, nonprofits, small businesses, neighborhood associations. We're an organization of organizations. Individuals can join, but they usually do it through a couple of associations of individuals we established. And there's deliberateness and intent that's which I can explain. When people ask me, what do we do? When they press me for one word on what is our mission, I tell them it's power. And that usually gets an interesting reaction. A lot of people fear power and they react to the word power. I love talking about power. When they press further for what's your mission, what do you want power for? I say, we organize ordinary people to build power to strengthen the common good. Ordinary people building power to strengthen the common good. Now I could do 5 hours on each of those words, but I won't. But that's who we are and what we do. We do that so that democracy works. So I have a couple of theories about, I was talking to my 85-year-old aunt the other day about the election, and she says that I'm from Pittsburgh and I'm 71 years old, but she still calls me my childhood name. She said, Bobby, why did millions, 60 million, 70 million, 80 million people vote for Trump? And I said, well, Aunt Joanne, I think it's two reasons. I think, number one, this country is changing and white men are reacting to their loss of status and power in our country. Everybody reacts to the lack of status and power in their world. And I said the second reason is that the income disparity in this country is destroying the middle class. People are angry about it and they're reacting to it. So I think that Common Ground has been able to develop a power analysis of the world that helps people that want to understand how things really work in this country to help them understand how it works, including elections, which have become all about voter suppression and keeping democracy and keeping people of color who are going to dominate our country over the next 20 or 30 years in their place. And so that's what we teach and that's what we engage in. But we also engage in not just understanding power, but we also engage in exercising power. We do something about it. So if you want to have power to change things in this country, you have to have one of two things. And sometimes you better have both. You better have lots of organized people behind you and or lots of organized money. We've got both. And that gives us real power. And power, posse, Latin word, ability to act, it gives us the ability to do things. Now, before we talk about the election, I'll tell you one quick story, which I usually use to illustrate how we began to develop power in this city. It happened in 2008, early on after we were formed, when the foreclosure crisis hit. And there may be another one coming next year. But in 2008, thousands of people lost their homes because the subprime corrupt mortgages that Wells Fargo and many other banks pushed on people forced them out of their homes. Rather than just sit around and wring our hands or form a silly task force to study it, we went out and knocked on doors, talked to people in their neighborhoods and say, hey, what do you want to change in your neighborhood? And we said, do you want to do something about it? We have an iron rule in our work, which is never do anything for anyone they can do for themselves. We put hundreds of people together to do what we call research actions. We found out that the largest owner of foreclosed properties in the city of Milwaukee was Deutsche Bank. And nobody ever understood what a Deutsche Bank was. We then spent, probably 3 years going after 5 of the largest banks of the world, and Sue can tell you stories about going to Germany and confronting Dr. Joseph Ackerman, the CEO of Deutsche Bank, in their shareholders meeting in Frankfurt twice. But we finally won, and we made those banks put up about $30 million for us to be able to restore the housing market in one neighborhood in Sherman Park, where we have, over the last 6 years, acquired, rehabbed, and resold 91 formerly foreclosed homes. And we've restored millions of dollars in wealth to people that were devastated by corrupt companies like Wells Fargo Bank. So I love the anger that wells up in me. I learned how to exercise that anger when I was at Marquette, and I'm very thankful to the theology department for that. And that's what inspires many of us to have the courage to go out and fight, to confront, to cause trouble if we need to. But, you know, I think we've learned how to be very relational. I think we've learned how to be very savvy in our political judgment. We have no permanent enemies and no permanent allies, just permanent interests. And thousands of people in this city have benefited from the organizing work that we've undertaken. So I'll stop, see if you have any questions about who Common Ground is, and turn it back to Bob.
Thanks, Bob. One of the things that I appreciate about Common Ground is whenever it gets involved in an action, it looks for a winnable action. It's never protesting just for the sake of protesting. And it looks to learn from the action. So you never lose. I mean, you might lose your action, but the aim is to learn from it. I keep that in mind as I ask for Sue and Matt and Steve to tell a little bit about how they got involved in Common Ground and how they got involved in our GOTV movement initiative this year. And maybe, Sue, we can begin with you. You're somewhat of a folk hero for us because you are our voice in Frankfurt, bringing down Deutsche Bank.
Yeah, that was the culmination of, as Bob said, a lot of work on the ground by Common Ground members, knocking on doors, doing the research, and trying to find multiple access points as a way to get to the banks. So, you know, it was fortuitous. We had some contacts in Germany that got us in there. But what I always really liked about Common Ground in my years of involvement through my church is that it's a group effort. And if you can't do that much on a particular campaign, or if you're overwhelmed with other things like work or whatever, it doesn't all fall on you. There's always someone else there to step up. And that's what I like about it, that you can see how ordinary people can make huge change. I mean, Bob was talking about the foreclosure crisis, but one of the things that stands out for me is the establishment of the Common Ground Healthcare Cooperative, which is one of the few nonprofit co-op insurance companies still around. Most of them failed. They were established around the time of the Affordable Care Act and got some loans, to startup loans, and most failed. But we were one of 3 left standing after a few years. And a lot of it had to do with just having people going out on the streets and going to door to door with small businesses up and down Main Street saying, hey, we're not insurance agents, but if you're looking for an affordable option for yourself or your employees, here, call this number. This is Common Ground. And that was huge. We were able to do, we're I think one of the largest, Bob can tell me, correct me on this, but I think we're one of the largest insurers on the healthcare.gov website in the state. So that's an example where people, you know, some people had expertise in insurance, but a lot of people also just said, hey, I want to do something and I want to make sure my neighbors, my family members, my parishioners can get affordable insurance. So, so I liked that aspect of it, that it is about organizing people and doing it strategically and in a smart way to win things, even though people would probably initially write you off and say, nah, you can't do that. The other thing I like is that it's bottom up. It's we don't come in with a set agenda saying we're going to do this, this, and this. It's the members who decide what matters to them, whether that's the result of knocking on doors or having assemblies and meetings and then breaking out and then saying, what is it that you care about? What is it that your parish or your organization cares about? And it's truly democracy from the bottom up. And so the other thing that took me a long time to understand was the idea about building relationships for the long haul, that it's not about a particular issue. This organization is about building long-term relationships with people so that we can make positive change over the years. And what that particular issue is really up to the members. So that's what I really enjoy about it. And then getting involved with Get Out the Vote. As I said, I talked to Bob earlier in the year about, we had some coffee and we were talking about Common Ground, and he said, we want to get out this effort started in Marquette University. Would you like to help out? And I said, sure, I'd look into it. And then at one of those organizing meetings, Bob Masson and I talked, and we were the 2 faculty members who already had some background with Common Ground. And then Matt, my student, my former student actually, in one of my classes, had contacted me about saying, what can I do to make a difference and to, you know, to do something about this polarization? I'll let him tell his story. And I said, well, there's Common Ground. We're trying to Get Out the Vote. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, Matt, that's a Nice transition.
Like I said earlier, I was in Dr. Jaimo's biology and moral behavior class, and I really like that class. I'm a neuroscience guy at my roots. It's what I work in. It's how I look at the world. So, you know, that class really helped me tie some meaningful things to neuroscience that, you know, I didn't really have before. And then, you know, with everything that was going on in April, especially the murder of George Floyd, it was just a really upsetting thing to see. And a lot of the reactions to it just, you know, there was a lot of negativity in the situation. I felt, you know, I had to do my part as, you know, a leader at Marquette, as an older student. I began looking for, you know, something to be a part of. And I really wanted to center on getting out the vote, because I really do believe in our democracy, and I really do believe that we have the power to push change through our votes. And I figured, you know, especially with how the voting laws are in Wisconsin and after how the April election went, that there was work to be done there. So I got involved with Common Ground, and I ended up splitting time between Common Ground and working with Dr. Wachowski with Marquette Votes. And so I was pretty involved in getting the students out to vote, and, you know, spreading to health sciences and other departments. And I actually I took my roommates to vote in person, and I was talking to one of the ladies that was working the polls, and I was saying, you know, have you seen a lot of Marquette students coming through here? Because, you know, you could always tell the Marquette students because they're wearing their gear everywhere. Marquette sweatshirt, a Marquette hat, one of the Marquette shirts from the basketball games. And she said, you know, yeah, you know, there's been Marquette students coming in all week to vote early. And, you know, that was kind of the first feeling of, you know, success that I felt with this campaign, because, you know, this is one of those things where you might not see the results right away. And I think we're actually still waiting on the data, but, you know, I'm pretty confident that we had a pretty successful campaign this year. And yeah, I was just happy to be a part of it. It was great for me to get into the humanities and out of really the hard sciences for a little bit, because, you know, I used to do much more volunteer work, but nowadays, you know, work in the lab eats up a lot of my time along with classes. So for me, it was just a very eye-opening experience to be a part of Common Ground and to work on these campaigns.
Steve, I wonder if you can, we had a couple of our Get Out the Vote people who were terrifically effective. One of our undergrad students couldn't be with us. She's got an exam, but Steve was one of the others. And could you talk a little bit about what was different about Common Ground's approach, what distinguished our approach, and maybe why you think you were able to help us so much?
Yeah, a couple of things, a few things actually, I guess. Number one is that it was focused on reaching out to people that you have some existing connection or relationship to, either a very close one or maybe a little bit more of a distant one. But, you know, and I'm sure all of you received dozens of texts and emails from, hi, this is Josh with whoever. And I'm like, Josh, I don't know who you are, right? Who just want, you know, obviously have an interest in who you vote for. And that was the other thing, is that, and I'll touch on this again in a minute, but the fact that we were really very nonpartisan in the way we went about this. And it wasn't, I'm with so-and-so for Trump, so-and-so for the Green Party. And so there was a certain openness, I think, to, okay, you just want me to do, you know, to facilitate my democratic rights and my activities, and support me in my own desires. And so I think that was helpful also. And then finally, the one of the things that Common Ground promises is to go back after the election and check the public records to see if your vote actually counted or if it was rejected for some reason. And I think that was very appealing to a lot of people, that extra step, knowing that, they would have a sense of, because just with all of the questionable data being, or ideas being put out there before the election of, this won't count or that won't count, it was good for people to be able to say, okay, at least I will know, what happened to my ballot after I send it in. So I think all those things were helpful. A couple of other things that I noticed just during the campaign. One was how tough it was for me at first, and especially for others, to reach out to people about this stuff. You don't really want to talk about politics generally. And I was surprised that there were a lot of folks who I reached out to, who I asked, who are very excited to participate in this by giving me their information. And then I said, would you mind reaching out to a few friends? And most of them were either like radio silence or they said, yeah, and then never seemed to go about doing it. And it was just, there really is a difficulty in talking to even friends about politics. I think, again, one of the things that was helpful was the nonpartisan nature of this, which made it easier for me. But it also kind of brought me to a reckoning about, like, what do I believe about democracy and how firmly do I hold to it? And I say that because there are a couple of times where, friends who probably would vote differently than me, I had to decide, was I going to reach out to them also to invite them or not? And even talking to some other friends and saying, hey, you could reach out to people at your work, and they'd say, why would I want to reach out to them? Like, they're voting on the other side of this thing. And I kind of had to push and say, like, yeah, but the person I want for president is the person who my fellow Americans want for president, right? Like, obviously I have a preference, but it's kind of putting yourself out there in democracy and saying, if I'm going to be part of this, I have to believe that, like, I want everybody to vote who's eligible to vote, who should be eligible to vote, whether or not they agree with my politics. And that's kind of a vulnerable approach to politics. And that's kind of, I think, like Matt said, like, why democracy is so beautiful, but also so difficult, is that you are, not pushing through your own agenda. You're promoting your own agenda while being beholden to the ideas and values of your community. So I think all those things made it a pretty powerful experience for me, even though this was done almost entirely on my part and all of our parts virtually. I can just imagine how much more powerful it would be if I could, have one-on-one chats in person with friends and, really go door to door and things like that. So, yeah.
Thanks. So the one thing we haven't talked, and maybe I'll go back to Bob for one last question before we open it up to everyone. We haven't talked about accountability. And one of the things that I really liked about my work with Common Ground is it has all kinds of ways in which it has procedures for holding us accountable. So Bob, maybe you could talk a little bit about how we held ourselves accountable on the election.
Well, one example was that we're very strong about measuring accountability. And we're very strong about measuring results. So throughout the campaign, we said that we wanted to see if we could help 15,000 people vote. And how would we measure whether we did that or not? And the way we figured we would measure that is, let's get the names and addresses of the people that pledged that they wanted to vote and were interested in voting. And after the election, we'll make sure that their ballots got counted, because we'll check them against the public record. We had a meeting yesterday with the election commissioners. December 18th, whether you voted or not will become a public record. If you think that whether you voted is private, it is not. Who you voted for is private, but the fact that you voted is a very public record. And so we said, we'll hold ourselves accountable to that standard so that we will collect names and addresses. We won't just say we're going to do something. We will prove that we did it. So before we launched the campaign, we had a meeting with 300 volunteers online, and we took quotas. And we pledged to each other how many people we would sign up and work with to vote. I personally said I'll get 250 names and addresses of people that will pledge to vote. I ended up with 405 names. I know a lot of people, and I'm not afraid to ask people, and I'm not afraid to get to know them and build a relationship with them. And I've been organizing all my life. So, but what that does is it puts a certain amount of tension into all of us, because it's one thing to say you're going to do something. It's another thing to actually do it. I've been raising money all my life, and I always say to people, I listen to what people say. I believe what they do. And that's why we hold ourselves accountable.
And we got over 15,000 names, didn't we?
Yeah, I think we're up to over 16,000. We're writing our final report. And I'm real curious to see how the turnout numbers were at Marquette too, if it increased this year or not, because across the city, it was pretty flat.
Yeah. So thank you to the panelists. Appreciate your comments. And now it's open to questions. Or comments.
Two new people joined the meeting, Bob. I don't know who they are. Christine
yes.
Fleming and Mary P.
Yes, could you introduce yourselves? Christine?
Hello. I don't know if you can hear me. I am working from home. I work at the Hagerty Museum of Art. I'm the manager of community engagement. So sorry for joining late, but the great discussion.
I'm glad you could join us. And Mary?
Yes, I'm also working from home. I'm a Marquette alumna, class of 1982.
Great.
Happy to come to Soup with Substance. I used to attend back in the late 70s and early 80s. It was around then.
Terrific. Jessica, do you have something?
I do. I've got two questions. One is, do we know yet what the next campaign is? And two, given that this is an organization of organizations, and that's sort of where the power lies, if one is interested in being more involved in Common Ground as an individual, what are the opportunities?
So if you go to the Common Ground website, you see we have a number of campaigns that are currently going. So that's one way to get involved. We used to be pretty active on campus, and so we were a group. That's kind of an issue now. Organizing on campuses was something new for Common Ground is part of the Industrial Areas Foundation, which is a much larger group. And this was an experiment. It worked very well for a number of years. When we talked about the housing campaign, we had maybe 300, maybe more students involved in that. I remember going out with a group of 50 students in neighborhoods, just taking inventory, trying to figure out to whom these houses belong. But for that to work, we have to have more faculty involved. And the kind of key organizers the last number of years were Jerry Fisher in campus ministry and myself, and we both retired. And when you're not on campus, it's hard to facilitate things. And if, unless you've got somebody who's kind of got those connections. So we're always looking to see if there's somebody who's interested in doing it. And I think it's also really hard for graduate students or adjunct faculty to take this on. And like many things for faculty at Marquette, it's I used to call them hobbies. It's not something that counts much on tenure. resumes and things of that sort. Bob?
Yeah, there are two organizations that accept individual memberships. One is called Eastsiders for Common Ground. I can put you in touch with them. And then another group called 4040. And that's 40 people under 40 years of old age that gather together. They socialize a lot too, but they also organize. So those are the two organizations we've created that are part of Common Ground, pay dues, and accept individuals and relate to individuals. So if you're interested in those, send Bob an email and we'll put you in touch with them.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I am. I mentioned before this meeting to Bob, I actually have to go because I have an appointment at 1, but this has been really wonderful and I'm excited to continue my involvement in some way. Thank you.
Terrific. Any other comments, questions? Raise your hand or.
I have a question.
Sue.
For Matt and Steve. Steve talked a little bit about what he was doing, talking to people he knew to get them involved and get out the vote. But I really wanted to emphasize that the success of this campaign really rested with the students talking to each other and getting out the word in their various departments. This would not have flown. I mean, the faculty people were more like sort of out there kind of organizing it a little, giving an umbrella, some direction strategically, and then maybe announcing voter registration efforts and ways to vote in their classes. But we really, I especially being teaching remote, didn't have a lot of presence on campus, didn't have a lot of interaction with students in the way that this campaign really required. So I don't know if Matt, you wanted to talk a little bit more too about what you did. I mean, you said you got involved, but you really did some outreach in areas that we don't usually think of as being politically active. And I think it was critical to the success, whatever gains we made, and I'm not sure what the numbers are yet, it wouldn't have happened without the students on the ground doing it.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny you mentioned the presence on campus because I had the exact same feeling this semester. As an upperclassman, just about all of my classes, all except for one, were shifted online. So I really lost a little bit of my presence in, some of my social circles that I had when I used to be going to class. And I found, this semester that it was, I just had, less socializing with people in my major. And that was just due to not going to class, not having those interactions next to people. It was tough. But what we did with reaching out to faculty and getting announcements before classes, I had a cognition class this semester with Dr. Nielsen, and she let me talk a little bit before one of the classes. And, I had Dr. Gil Martin make an announcement. Really the best way to reach out to people this semester was, when they were tuning into online classes, in my opinion. It's, like watching TV. It's like having a commercial. And, I think that, one of the interesting things I learned from Dr. Wachowski is that you would think that health sciences would be one of the, less involved, less interested in voting and all that. But actually, historically, health sciences is one of the better turnouts in the college. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little fact. And, I think that, in a way, health sciences didn't need as much of a push because the way that the classes are taught are very focused on the community. And I think that, especially in, my neuroscience classes, the professors really challenge you to think about, your community and, what having a sense of autonomy in the community and the power to vote really does for the health of the community. So, between that, I had some friends in student orgs that allowed me to come in and talk a little bit. And, that was kind of the extent of my campaign. But I think that, it was a really, really tough time the vote with with COVID. I think that, that presented a real challenge like we've never seen before. And, one of the hallmarks of COVID has been, decreased social interactions, and, we're not getting out like we used to. And, we really had to think about ways to navigate around that. And, it was difficult, but I'm hoping that when the stats come in and we look at turnout, that we had some sort of impact. And I'm pretty confident we did, though.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what the results are when they come out. Matt, can you send them to us?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're going to send them to me, but I know Dr. End up with some sort of project that tallies up the votes, apparently. But yeah, I can get that information out when it comes in. I think it should be in by January, which kind of seemed pretty soon. But I'll keep an update on that. I'll keep my finger on the pulse there.
Good, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Sue?
I have
Mary
one.
Sue? No, Steve.
Yeah, if nobody else does this, maybe this is a rhetorical question, or maybe this is not, but even just with the name Common Ground, I'm curious kind of what the next steps are in terms of kind of trying to unify communities, the country, et cetera, and what Common Ground might do there. I think even though it's nonpartisan, there's no secret that probably our values in Common Ground align more with the Biden administration, the incoming administration. And so there's a danger of saying, aha, we won, and so now we can just push things forward, right? And the question is, okay, well, what role does Common Ground have in, if any, in kind of trying to bridge that gap? And I like what Bob Conley said earlier about, we have no permanent enemies or permanent allies, we just have permanent issues. But I'm just curious if anybody has ideas of what might that look like for an organization like Common Ground to make a very difficult attempt at bridging some of the divide politically.
Yeah, I can offer some reaction to that. And I'd be curious to your analysis of the election, but my analysis of the election is that it was moderate people in Wisconsin that swung the election. It wasn't people that are real strong on the left or the right. And I think those are the people we trying to organize in Common Ground. We are intentionally diverse. We have Republicans, Democrats, independents. We have people from all religions, all races, classes, geographies in this region. And the way to overcome any divide is to build relationships of trust and understanding. And you do that, it's hard work. You do that very carefully, very precisely, but also very intentionally, where you want to meet people that don't always think like you. So I tell this anecdote about what I think happened in the election. I have a brother-in-law and sister-in-law. My wife and I have been married for 50 years, so I've known them for all my life in Milwaukee and Wisconsin. And they voted for Trump in 2016. And why did they? Because they're conservative Catholics and they vote oftentimes around the abortion issue. So back in August, we had dinner with them, and I said, we're going to talk to them about this. And I said, what are you thinking this time? Not judging them. We talk all the time about everything. And I said, what do you think? And they both said, well, we can't vote for him again. And I said, well, why not? And he said, because we thought a lot of his stuff in 16 was rhetoric and he'd change and become more presidential and blah, blah, blah. And they said, but he didn't. And they're moral people. And they couldn't stomach the fact that they'd have to vote for a guy like him that they found to be very, very, very immoral. So my brother-in-law and sister-in-law are as middle of the road, moderate thinking and acting people that you'll ever find. They are as Wisconsinite as anybody I've ever met. And I think those are the kind of people, that's an anecdote, but I think if you study the numbers in the suburbs, because it wasn't Milwaukee turnout that went up. It was the suburbs of Milwaukee County that went up. It wasn't Madison City, it was the suburbs of Madison City and the suburbs of Milwaukee, like Brookfield, Elm Grove, margin of victory shifted in those. So those are people we want to continue to organize. I don't people that are out waving flags and carrying guns to rallies. I don't know that they want to relate to anybody but themselves. But the moderate people, that's about 40% of this country, are the people we want to reach. The 40% in the middle.
The piece two pieces I'd add. One is the full title is Common Ground for Southeastern Wisconsin. And so built into the beginning to try to find issues common to people in the suburbs as well as the cities. And the other is from my own personal experience. I've been going to an African-American parish for a number of years, and that's where I had most of my African-American friends. But Common Ground is really a tri-racial group. And the work I've done on the Jobs Committee, meeting a number of Black pastors and deacons and parishioners, has just been terrific. So if you want a real ecumenical experience, I couldn't recommend a better place than Common Ground. It's been really terrific. Mary Sue, you had a hand up. We can't hear you. Your sound isn't on.
I got it now. Okay, thanks. Okay. People keep asking my questions, which is great. The only question I have left is, if students or faculty or staff on campus are interested in connecting with Common Ground, who would they contact?
The only person, me.
Okay.
Or probably me. And if what I'm particularly interested in is if we had faculty who would help sponsor it on campus. Although, I mean, this year obviously is kind of unique. But what we found, our experience was you get students sophomore year, freshman year, they're kind of looking all over and they don't know what's going on. And a real student involvement would be sophomore and junior year. Senior year, they're gone. I mean, they're on campus, but they're gone. Yeah, I mean, Matt, you're an exception. You've really been involved this year. But so it's a real transient, and that's why we were strongest when Jerry could pull in people from campus ministry. I mean, it wasn't his major thing that he did, but that was a big part. And then earlier on, when now I've forgotten her name, Bobby Timberlake was running the service learning program. She was just a great recruiter and facilitator. So we kind of need somebody on campus who can play that kind of role. I want to help as much as I can, but once you're removed from campus, it's like being the COVID thing. It's
okay.
Any other questions? We're getting close to the time, and I think, from what I've understand, Soup with Substance is like Common Ground. When we have our meetings, we say we're going to meet for an hour, and we try to be very good about ending on the time we promise, so as not to take advantage of people's time. So Amanda, I pass it back to you.
Yeah, I just included a link if you want to sign up for a Soup with Substance email list. Today is our last Soup with Substance of the semester, so we'll start up again, say the first week or so of February. But also, I think I found Common Ground's website, so I included that in the chat too for anyone interested in learning more or joining the group. But yeah, I just want to thank Robert and everyone, all our panelists for speaking, and everyone who attended today's Soup. And thanks again, everyone, for coming in, those who spoke today.
Thanks
you.
for
It was a
having us.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.